Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending our talk. This is the title of the talk. You can tell my marketing team came up with it. Try saying this 4 times really fast. Abstracting complexity, unlocking opportunity. Simplified Web3 development and rewards for open source projects. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself and my co-speaker. I'm Max Howell, or MXCL as I tend to go online as. I've always been a bit of an open source person, and I'm most famous for my work Homebrew, which I created almost 15 years ago now. One of the biggest open source projects of all time. Moada, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Moada Basir. I'm head of product at T, building crypto products for about 10 years now across different ecosystems and blockchains and user groups, and excited to present today with Max.
Firstly, let me go back a little and talk about Homebrew. I actually have a chemistry degree. I was never going to be a programmer. The reason for that is when I was trying to figure out what I would be in life, I met some programmers at a job fair, and they scared me with their incredible level of geekiness. So I thought I'll be a scientist, and I went and did a chemistry degree, where I discovered that, in fact, everything everyone had told me about chemistry was true, and it's an incredibly boring subject. Falling into a depressed funk, I discovered Linux. I got involved in the open source communities on Linux. This was 2003, 2004 or so. And I started working on open source projects. It was incredibly rewarding. I couldn't stop myself. I ended up going back to live with my parents and working on them all night, so I didn't have to talk to my parents. In that process, I managed to get myself a job in the tech industry. Some company in London called Last.fm liked the work I'd done. So I skipped the whole step of having to get a degree that made sense and got straight into programming. While I was there, I created Homebrew. Part of the reason I created it was because we were working on 6 different apps at the place, and we used Mac as the unified development platform. This was kind of new. This was 2007 or so. And there wasn't really a very good package manager for Mac. So I used to complain about this to my colleagues after work at the pub, and eventually they got fed up with my complaints and told me to do something about it. So I did. I went home and started the work on Homebrew. A few months later, I open sourced it, and it became phenomenally successful incredibly quickly. So much so that I quit my job to work on Homebrew full time. I had a bit of money saved up, and it was a much more rewarding thing to do. It was incredible how much impact it was having, how much excitement it was generating in the developer sphere. Eventually, I ran out of money, though, and this started this cycle for me, where I would go and find a job. Maybe I liked it, maybe it was acceptable, earn a bit of money, save up, quit, then go back to working on open source full time. After a few years of this, and tens of thousands of hours of work on Homebrew, and the feeling that I was always doing 2 full-time jobs, I eventually burned out. Which is where I want to talk about T and T protocol. My story is common in open source. The people who make open source love working on open source. Typically, they make things that are important. When these things are made, they enter this stack of bricks in the entire software sector. Because the truth is, 80% of enterprise software is built on top of open source nowadays. Over the last 15 years or so, open source went from being something that was derided. Microsoft used to spread what we call fear, uncertainty, and doubt about open source. They declared that it was insidious and viral and dangerous. But Web 2 decided to build on top of open source. In that process, Web 2 companies have made small fortunes, while the people like myself who were maintaining the open source that made that possible were not getting anything. We never made open source because we expected anything. We were making open source because we loved making it. But this divide between what was happening at the top and what was happening to us just didn't seem right. This comic we have here is based on a famous one by XKCD called Dependency. And in that comic, The little brick at the bottom there that's holding up everything is labeled as some random open source package developed by someone from Nebraska, thanklessly, since 2003. And this is part of the problem with open source, is that the pieces fall into this tower, but then over time, they get forgotten. And they are thanklessly maintained, but they're holding up everything. And we like to rethink this comic now as actually Web 2 is that pillar that's holding up the entire Web 3 ecosystem. My story is not unique, and even it's not the most concerning. Like here we have a quote from this guy who maintains Core.js. Core.js is downloaded 5 to 6 billion times a year. 80% of all the top 100 websites in the world use Core.js. In fact, it's pretty difficult to make any kind of JavaScript application without it, and yet the guy thanklessly maintains it. I love this quote because it just really resonates. If he stopped maintaining it, what would happen to the internet? A couple of years ago, this happened, just as I was raising money for tea. Log4j is this not very well-known dependency that is in a huge amount of internet software. And someday someone found this really bad security exploit, and suddenly, for a week or so, everything on the internet was easily hackable. The people who maintain it received an awful lot of threats and bad vibes, is what I'd say. And the enterprises that depend on it didn't really understand. They don't understand that they have all this open source underneath everything that they're building, and they demanded fixes. So the developers said, well, okay, we'll fix it, but maybe you could like sponsor us a bit of funding after we fixed it. They fixed it. They still have almost no funding. A couple of years ago, I was once again in between jobs trying to figure out how to work on open source full time. And I looked at the current crop of solutions to that. There was new ones, but I couldn't see anything that would make it possible. So I decided that maybe this time around it was my personal mission to try and fix that. So I dove deep. I wasn't really familiar with Web3 or crypto, but I looked into it. And in a moment of inspiration, I saw the possibility of putting all this package data that I was intimately familiar with onto the chain, and using the connections between those packages to direct token. At T, we see it as our mission to support open source. The Web 2 open source sphere keeps the entire internet running, and yet, for some reason, people feel that it has no value. Most open source developers have something in their README which is like, hey, why don't you buy me a coffee? Because that's kind of all they feel that they can ask for, even though their software is powering the internet. There's 2.2 million open source developers, and for comparison, there's probably only 30,000 Web3 developers. Web3 is doing okay, but all these open source Web2 type developers are the ones that we need to support, or we're going to run out of steam. 5.8 million open source repos, 10.5 million packages. T Protocol has onboarded all of this. If you go to t.xyz today, because we launched our testnet last week, you can onboard your package and start receiving rewards based on the impact of your open source contributions. We call it proof of contribution. And we've calculated all the different impacts of all the different open source packages that exist. Our aim is to bring all of the Web 2 developers that exist onto Web 3. And so far, we have over 200,000 signups for our testnet. And that's in less than a week. But why are we using blockchain and crypto? Well, my simple answer to that is the solutions that currently exist have not succeeded. Some people are making okay with the existing solutions that are out there, but the truth is the vast majority can't get much. My GitHub sponsors currently is $8 a month. That's a couple of coffees. There needs to be a solution that really can fix it, and the only way we can go forwards is by trying something new. I'll pass to Mawada now, who can talk about a few more of our utility functions.
Thanks, Max. So we understand that the T solution has three components to it: the protocol, the proof of contribution algorithm, but the third piece is the application that brings it all together, the GUI, the front end that lets people actually interact with the platform. And with that, and a blockchain crypto backend, Web3 backend, we actually hit this interesting UX conundrum that is as old as the age of crypto. And so for the past 8 years of my career, it's been an ongoing mission trying to solve this UX conundrum. And what we really mean by that is, how do we take the blockchain interactions that are happening, the transaction signing, wallets, all of that all those pieces of the puzzle, and make it easy for users? How do we actually make a great user experience behind this? And the big driver here is actually recognizing part of our target market, and that is the Web2 developers. The Web2 side, they're not exactly that familiar with Web3, crypto. They may not know what a wallet is, although they are very technical, very sophisticated and intelligent groups of people. That's just a part of the world that they haven't interacted with. And that's fine. They don't need to understand that part of the technology in order to use the product and to get value out of the software and the solution that T is spearheading. And so the thought becomes, okay, well, how do we create a user experience for that side of the market? How do we abstract away the blockchain? How do we abstract away wallets? How do we abstract away transaction signing, but still give the power of crypto to that user group? And then the other camp we have is the Web3 developers. They're very familiar with crypto, wallets, transaction signing, multi-sig, all those pieces of the tech stack. But no one really wants to do those actions. No one wants to have to click a button in MetaMask 3 times to stake. They don't want to have to record another private key somewhere, make sure it's stored properly in order to actually ensure recovery of their assets. That side of the camp also does not want to have to think all the time either to be able to use a platform like T. And so this whole idea, this very common notion of don't make me think in user experience, for some reason is considered a luxury for developers as the end users. And so we took it to ourselves to figure out, how do we actually build a user experience for that market that serves them in every way, resonates with them, but also really is consistent, reliable, and easy to use. And so we considered a few things in our approach. And there's really 4 pillars to how we approach user experience with the T protocol and the application built on top of it. The first is empowering the sleekness and power of Web3. All Web3 apps, for the most part, there's a few outliers out there, have incredible UIs. They're beautiful, they're sleek, they're slick, they're clean. But the other part of it is, once you are into Web3, the onboarding process is pretty simple. You bring your own wallet, you log in with that wallet, you're all set. You can play around with Uniswap, DYDX, whatever it is. And so that kind of sleekness and power was really important to how we actually designed the application. The second pillar is empowering self-custody. Although we want to make things easier for the Web2 camp and still simple for Web3, there's this idea of self-custody that needs to be in there. Centralized exchanges are a great example of that. Simple user experience, no self-custody. And so how do we still allow for the self-custodian piece of this? And that means self-custody wallets, as well as a roadmap towards decentralization truly. And that means that T, us as core contributors, are not in the middle. We do not control anything. It is truly self-custody and self-sovereignty in how people can interact with the protocol and the proof of contribution algorithm. The third piece still is always a mission in Web3, and that's why we have so many layer 2s come out and different blockchains come out, is this drive to have low costs. In the end, no one wants to have to pay $100 to send some ETH to someone else, which for a period of time in 2018, I do remember painfully having to pay that much to make a transaction go through that I needed to go through. Unnecessary, removes away from the actual value of the technology. And so part of actually accomplishing that pillar in our user experience is looking at layer 2s. And we were able to accomplish this with Base as our layer 2. But also another part of this is smart contract design and efficient smart contract design. How do we make our smart contracts that actually make the protocol move work efficiently and therefore at a lower cost of gas? And the fourth pillar, which is always the most interesting one to work with, just because the user experience of Web 2 apps, fintech apps that are out there, it's hard to build them one-to-one as far as UX goes with crypto because of the nuances of the blockchain. But we took pieces of those UX of those Web 2 apps to build out the T app. And really primarily going back to the first point of bring your own wallet, it's also bring your own account. Single sign-on was a critical part of that. So users can actually sign up for the T app with their Google account, Microsoft account, Discord account. They don't have to create a new one. They don't have to download MetaMask, figure out how it works, store their seed phrase somewhere, and now have to remember this other account that they have to manage. It's all within their Google account. The other piece of this that we've learned and has been quite a mission to get to is trying to enforce simple language in our application. If you look at Web 2 apps that are super successful with the masses, language is simple. You don't have to understand what's going on behind the scenes to understand what kind of action you're doing on the front end. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle. However, part of it is also ensuring that we educate users as well. We don't want people to be blind to what's happening behind the scenes. We want to slowly, gradually educate them on what is happening. What are staked tokens? How do you register a project? What is a multisig? What is a treasury? What are tokens in the end? All of these pieces actually flow into the verbiage and copy of the application, which actually helps educate users, but makes their lives easier because they know, oh, if I click this button, tokens will be taken out of my account. If I click this button, tokens will be deposited into my account. Awesome. And the third piece, which is actually the biggest piece to accomplish, was account abstraction. And what that really means is how do we take away the layers of the blockchain and just simplify it for the end user? And there's a lot of layers to this. Part of it is how do we actually ensure that the user doesn't have to click a button 4 times to do something? How do we make it a true one-click done activity? The other piece of it as well, though, is how do we actually allow users to interact with the blockchain in other ways without understanding truly what's going on behind the scenes? What are gas fees? Oh, do I need to acquire ETH in order to pay for the gas for this transaction when I already have T tokens in my account, and that's what I'm using? All these little pieces of the puzzle that have actually caused a lot of friction to user experience and application so far in Web3 have been a big part of our mission, and every day brainstorming of how do we make our app more accessible. And we know this is still a problem because we have not crossed the chasm yet in crypto adoption. There's a reason we haven't achieved mass adoption, and that's because it is still, generally speaking, difficult to enter a Web3 dApp. And so by leveraging account abstraction in its various forms, we're hoping that we're one step closer to that, maybe more. And the big thing to note there as well is that with account abstraction, although it's been around for a few years, there's different implementations of it. And we've had to spend a lot of time exploring what those implementations could look like for our application. And at the time when we started building, there were very few options. And so a lot of creativity had to be put into place to actually make it work for the user. So they don't know what's going on really behind the scenes. They just know that it works. And if it doesn't, they have someone to reach out to. And the big piece of the puzzle here is actually the base layer that we use for our app, for our protocol. And that is the layer 2 blockchain called Base, spearheaded by the Coinbase team. And there are many reasons why we chose it, and it also flows into the user experience of what we're building here. And firstly, it's the Coinbase integration. Millions of users, many on-ramp, off-ramp capabilities, other integrations with other applications and other pieces of code that we can pull into our system. The roadmap was also really intriguing. I mean, the roll-ups piece of it as well is really important for us to ensure the security of the chain and security and integrity of the transactions going on the chain. Skipping ahead, cost efficiency, robustness, also very important. But the biggest thing that drew us to Base was the open source component, as they live and breathe it, and as we live and breathe it. And we want to make sure that value alignment was there. And so with Base as our foundation, we're actually able to achieve a lot more on the account abstraction side. But we talked a lot right now about our approach in design, our pillars for UX. But how does that actually work? And so this is a bit more of a technical part of the conversation. But really what we're looking at here is that every user on our app has the EOA, their externally owned account. And we generate an AA, an account abstraction account for them. And that's actually through Safe. So we leverage Gnosis Safe for this. The user gets a Safe that is a one-of-one multisig attached to their EOA. So in this case, we have Alice and Bob. Alice comes into the system. She signs up with her Google account, and the EOA is generated for her, and that EOA is then attached to an AA or a Safe. Bob does the same thing. Now, both Alice and Bob are actually developers. They have a project called Hello World. It's on NPM. It has a T rank, so proof of contribution score of 35. They want to register it on T so they can start earning rewards for their contribution to the ecosystem. They come into the system, they follow the wizard, very easy, where they actually create the constitution of their project. They say, Alice and Bob, we are the two contributors, we are the governors of this project. Only at least two of us have to sign every transaction that goes through this application. So every time we want to do anything with our treasury, anything with our registered project, both of us have to sign, have to agree to it. That is the quorum rules. Once they actually create this constitution file, they actually have to prove that they truly own the project Hello World. They need to go into, for example, GitHub or directly to their Git. They have to upload that file, and that proves ownership because our system checks, does that file exist? Does it have the same wallet addresses that are provided in the system? Awesome. They're all set. Their project is now registered on T. But now they want to stake from their project. They have some tokens in there. They want to stake it. They want to receive some yield out of it. And so they want to start a stake. They want to initiate staking. Alice starts it. She initiates a transaction through our application. Transaction's constructed, and they can the transaction data is pre-generated. Alice then signs the hash data with her EOA. Bob does the same thing. And then we actually take that data. We attach it to another pre-generated data set of transaction data. We connect that all together, and then we actually send it to the paymaster where the gas fees are actually covered for that. So the user themselves don't have to actually get the ETH to pay for it, the base ETH. They don't have to figure out how to get that into their wallet. The paymaster actually covers it for them. It's then forwarded to the bundler that puts it all together, and then it calls their treasury to actually execute the transaction. At the end of all of that, they actually have a legitimate transaction go through. Tokens from their treasury are now staked to their own project, and they now receive yield on that. And so if you actually want to see this in action, the easiest way is to actually go to app.t.xyz where you can actually try it out. It's a way for you can sign up with your Google account, your Discord, your Microsoft. Bring Your Own Wallet is coming soon as well. And if you have an OSS project, you can go ahead and register it if it's in our supported package managers, and you can give it a try and see this UX in action. And as a thank you for attending today, we are minting some POPs to all attendees. So go ahead and scan the QR code, and you can get an NFT, which may make you eligible for rewards in the future. And that's all.